Horus Heresy storyline started in the very early days of Warhammer 40,000, and it was a small, colourful aside in a book called Chapter Approved, which was published way back in 88, maybe 89, which just basically introduced the idea that there had been some kind of major challenge to the Emperor, led by a character called Horus. It was never explained who he was, and it was never explained what that heresy was, but a third of the Imperium rose up, and eventually Horus was defeated and cast into the Eye of Terror. Sometime in the early part of the 1990s, one of our young upcoming designers, a chap called Jervis Johnson, made a pitch to the powers that be at Games Workshop that he wanted to do a series of counter-based games. The second of those games turned out to be a board game called the Horus Heresy, which took the elements that had been introduced and talked about in Adeptus Titanicus, and Jervis took those elements, took the story of the Horus Heresy and created that fantastic little board game.
It's the big story. Horus Heresy is the big story of the Warhammer 40,000 world. And so to adapt that into a board game was magnificent. It was a great opportunity. Each player has a different array of forces at his command. So the Emperor player has Space Marines, has Imperial armies, has other forces that are unique to that side, and so does the traitor player. The player who's playing Horus has Chaos Marines, has demons of the various Chaos powers, and has a completely different set of card decks that he uses to represent the different powers that he has at his command.
The new Fantasy Flight game of the Horus Heresy is it's not so much a representation of the old game, it's a reimagining of the original Horus Heresy board game. The board game is set at the absolute critical moment of decision about the 40k universe. It's the moment when Horus, who's the War Master, the appointed commander of all the forces of the Imperium, has taken his rebellious, traitorous horde, and he's leading them to Earth, ancient terror, to the palace of the Emperor himself. And it's the moment the board game tells the story effectively of the siege of the palace, when the traitor legions assault the very walls of the sanctified walls of the Emperor's palace. So one player gets to be Horus, the arch traitor, and the other player gets to be the Emperor. How cool is that?
Horus Heresy focuses on a portion of the whole world of Terra. It's the area where the Emperor's Imperial Palace is located, and then there are 4 major spaceports in the surrounding area. And that particular chunk of the world is where the board game takes place. So the Emperor starts in the palace. He has forces that are arrayed around the board. There's also a space of the board that represents the Vengeful Spirit, which is Horus's flagship, which is in orbit. So the traitor player starts with some forces there, and then during the course of setup, the traitor player gets to drop all kinds of forces onto the board, gets to attempt to turn traitor some of the forces that the Emperor thought was loyal to him. That's something that happens near the beginning of the story, which can turn dramatic. I'm really happy with the way we managed to also get a lot of gameplay information into the figures. Each one of them slots into a base that tells you what its combat rank is. So it's got a number of points on its base, 1, 2, 3, or 4, that tells you how good it is in combat just by looking. And looking across the table at your opponent's figures, you can see sort of what's arrayed against you. And the bases also have little hooks on them that you can use to insert tokens that track the damage to those figures. So not only do you know how powerful they are, you know how close they are to being taken out.
One of the most interesting things in Horus Heresy is the initiative track. The initiative track is the conductor by which both players will be taking their actions and issuing orders to their troops. Now, in other war games, it's typical for one player to take an action and then the other player to take an action, and they'll alternate one and then the other throughout the game. But in Horus Heresy, the initiative track forces me to select particular orders strategically and look at long-term objectives. Players are going to have to balance the need to play a particular strategic card with how much time that's going to give their opponent to react. This ebb and flow is pretty incredible and leads for an incredibly tense and exciting game. Horus Heresy doesn't include any dice. Everything is driven by card mechanics. And as far as the cards available, each player has a unique set of combat cards that will drive any of the activity when you're actually battling and fighting out with other units, as well as a deck of order cards. The order cards are your long-term strategies, and you're going to be paying the cost of those cards as you play them, and which drives the initiative track as well. But the combat cards are more tactical. They're going to be drawn fresh into your hand at the start of every combat. And so the card play is a matter not of hand management over the course of the game, but really what cards do I need to use to attack right now, or what cards would I like to reserve for defense in this particular battle.
There are a couple of different ways that the game can end. Either player can win by killing the opposing leader, right? So the traitor can win by killing the emperor. The imperial forces can win by killing Horus. It's also possible to win by controlling all 4 spaceports on the board. If the game goes on all the way to the end of the initiative track, the imperial player wins by default. So the traitor is really operating on a timer. If the marker gets all the way to the end of the initiative track, then far-flung imperial forces arrive back in the solar system, and the traitor player does not have any hope of prevailing against that, so the game ends. The big problem that you can run into when you're putting together a game like this is that it doesn't turn out being very replayable, and so we hit that head on when we were putting the game together, and we devised a lot of different scenarios that you can play, and each one of them plays differently. So in addition to playing each side in a game of Horus Heresy, you can play each side in 6 different scenarios that come in the box. A lot of the scenarios even play differently from play to play to play to play, because there are lots of different options for the players to choose from. So I think that people are going to get a lot of value out of this game and be able to play it over and over and over and over and have a different experience every time.
Well, I mean, this is the story that really does, define 40K, and as such, that's Games Workshop, are quite protective of this. It's something we're not necessarily going to let any Tom, Dick or Harry play with, but we kind of think the Fantasy Flight team have earned the right to have a crack at it, and boy have they delivered. The guys have been just absolutely fantastic at ensuring that that the Games Workshop sensibilities and sensitivities have been managed appropriately. Pretty much means that they've shown us everything that they're doing to ensure that it comes with the highest possible stamp of the canon and officialness. This is as close as you're going to get to the actual story of the denouement to the greatest challenge to mankind, to the Emperor, that the 40K universe ever knew.